Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You've reached the No Name Cinema Society, the film review show that digs a little bit deeper. And this is episode 70.2, our Indie Spotlight. And every year we spotlight indies from 5 years ago. So this year it's going to be indies from 2017. And tonight it's the film BRIGSBY BEAR from director Dave McCary. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your hosts here this evening. As I said, throughout 2022, we'll be looking at indies from 5 years ago, 2017. And the fun part about the last couple of years is we've been on the air for more than 5 years now, so we can address films that have appeared on the top 10 list that we did that specific year. Starting with the film from my top 10 of 2017, I mentioned BRIGSBY BEAR from director Dave McCary and co-writer and star Kyle Mooney of Saturday Night Live fame. So now it's time to introduce my co-hosts for the evening. First, ladies and gentlemen, a sound designer recently found in captivity who just recently learned there is life outside of Colorado. Matt Polis is here.
Hello, Jonathan.
Welcome back, Matty. Very excited. And now I'm going to introduce the newest member of the No Name Cinema Society. He's a 5'9" bear disguised as a human. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Angelo Santos.
Hey, JB. Thank you for having me.
I don't have a good transition, but this is our schedule. For this is what is our 70th series of episodes. It started last Thursday with a review of our current feature. Tonight, of course, is the Indie Spotlight BRIGSBY BEAR. And this upcoming Thursday is our classic movie discussion of the 1986 film Howard the Duck. And next Monday will be our 54th Sound Off, our freeform segment, in which I'm going to do a book review. We're going to do a tweet beat based on our finale episodes, the top 10 of 2021, the Oscar preview, and of course the 1986 in review. And Max and I are going to count down our top 5 1986 films. So that'll be coming up a week from tonight. So guys, that's our schedule for this, our 70th series of episodes. Matt, can you believe we're at 70 already?
When was your first episode? What year?
2015, February 2015. Season 8, I think we're on. So that is something to drink about. So I don't know who's drinking with me tonight. I've got this weird little summer ale. I'm a little nervous about it. I couldn't find an IPA at the Dwayne Reed's here in Astoria. And Angelo, I blame you. You're like down the block from me right now.
Yeah, and I don't know where you can get what you want.
I've got a Samuel Adams little summer ale thing. Angelo, you drinking with me tonight?
I got this brandy.
Matty P, what do you got?
Lemon zinger with honey.
That doesn't count. Gotta be alcohol. Speaking of which, here's the drinking game that you guys, the fans, made up. You sent us things that we do a lot on the show that you drink to when we do them. Anytime I say contrivance, contrive, verisimilitude, all time, or diegesis is when you drink. And anytime Matty Polis makes fun of me is when you guys drink. Of course, Angelo is just started, so the fans haven't sent anything in for you, Angelo. But soon you will have something on the drinking game, possibly.
Okay.
Cheers to Angelo.
How many suggestions does it take to get on the
just
game?
One.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. Cheers to Angelo and the audience out there watching.
Cheers.
Very exciting.
Cheers.
So this is something we do every 10 episodes.
Okay.
Every 10 episodes, we like to sort of have a review of the last 10 that we did. So here is a list of the last 10 indies that we've done. 4 of those films are from 2015, 5 of them from 2016, and of course, that last one is from 2017, tonight's review of BRIGSBY BEAR. Matt has been on 4 of those 10 shows, which is a lot. He's like the indie king now. Clouds of Sils Maria, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, Christine, and tonight's BRIGSBY BEAR. It's kind of an eclectic list. Anything jump out to you guys about this list?
No, but I enjoyed all 4 that we did the episodes on. Those were great films and great discussions. What's an indie to? Is it based on budget?
It is pretty much based on budget, yeah. And there are indies that there are some that are classified as indies that we felt like are a little too large. Like Midnight in Paris is counted as an indie, and I'm like, that's too big. Yeah. It's budget, but also a judgment call as well. Like 12 Years a Slave counted as an indie at the Indie Spirit Awards. I don't count that as an indie in my book. What do you got, Angelo, on this list?
Other People, man. Other People. Other People is actually one of my favorites from that year.
2016. You should check out our review episode. I think it's 68.2, whatever it says on the list there.
The Other People is also written and directed by somebody from SNL, just like BRIGSBY BEAR. So
yeah. So now it's time to talk trivia for tonight's indie. And so what I said in the last indie, which was the review of Tony Erdmann at the end of last season, is I said that for the second time in the last 3 indies, we'll discuss a film starring an SNL alum. This one written by the SNL actor who's actually still on the show. That was true when I made the trivia. He was still on the show when I said that, but he had his last show just last May. I'm referring, of course, to Kyle Mooney. The other SNL actor, of course, that Angelo just referred to, Molly Shannon and Other People, back in episode 68.2. We also did a top 5 performances by SNL alums in episode 68.4. So that's something else to check out. You guys ready for the summary and to kick off this discussion?
Yeah.
So now, summary, BRIGSBY BEAR. James lives with his parents in a closed-off facility in Utah because he is told that the air is unfit to breathe. But he does have his favorite TV show to keep him company, BRIGSBY BEAR, about the adventures of a 5.5-foot bear that teaches kids lessons about life. However, one day, the police raid his home and he is told he was abducted as a baby and that the world as he knew it does not exist. And that includes BRIGSBY BEAR, a show his parents made by themselves in order to maintain their world of illusions. And now James has to adjust to a world with his real family that he's never met and without BRIGSBY BEAR. Okay, so we got that taken care of. So Angelo, the indie spotlights are a little different in the sense that one of us has to recommend the film to others, almost like a dissertation. We present it to others, and almost always it's me. And so I'm going to go first, and I rarely do. I never go first in the other shows, but in the indie spotlight, whoever recommends goes first. And tonight it's me because I am recommending this film because I already said it made my top 10 films of 2017. So instead of me talking about it now, why not let my 2017 self talk about it? Here's a clip from our top 10 show that aired on February 27th, 2018.
All right, so I get to do my number 4, which is was another movie like Colossal and Donald Cried. I did not expect. Like I just sort of came in Netflix and it was on the list, so I watched it. And it's the second film on my top 10 that I did not see in the theater, second of 2. It's a surprisingly touching film that is also funny and sharp. This one's really going to surprise you guys. My number 4, and from 4 up, by the way, are films that I really loved. Like these are films that I would watch over and over again from 4 up. 4 up is the next level for me. And my number 4 is, I can't believe I'm saying this, BRIGSBY BEAR is my number 4 film of 2017. It's a script that makes the fish out of water concept seem fresh again. It was terrific and tight with nuanced details that rang true but were also funny. Like a darker and frankly more grounded Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. The relationships are well drawn and plausible. The world of BRIGSBY was very detailed and thorough. And Kyle Mooney is terrific. It's a great performance, highly believable under the circumstances, and also very detailed. It brings up a lot of questions about the continued paradox of mental health care in our society. And like many other films on the list, it addresses those issues in a highly entertaining way. I think it's a terrific accomplishment and a major surprise.
We didn't talk much about it then because the other guys hadn't seen it, but yeah, I can stand by everything I said back then. You guys were not on the show back then. Had you guys heard of or seen the movie before being assigned to watch it tonight?
Nope.
No.
Never even heard of it before.
Nope, never heard of it.
Oh my gosh. All right. So it's a brand new discovery, possibly. It's time for opening thoughts for these guys, and it's 1 sentence or less. So it's Angelo's first time, so I'm going to let Matt go first to sort of show him how it's done. Matt, 1 sentence or less. How do you feel about BRIGSBY BEAR this first time watching it?
I thought BRIGSBY BEAR is a really enjoyable film with a great cast, which it was more charming and better than the poor marketing materials would suggest. And which is good because the somewhat flimsy premise, I don't think, would survive a second viewing.
That was not a good opening thought, Angelo. That was way too long for opening thoughts. And I'm disappointed in Maddie because he usually...
It's 2 sentences, too. It was only 2
1.
sentences. I squeaked out a second.
Unacceptable. So you get a thumbs down for opening thoughts. Angelo, see if you can do a little better. 1 sentence or less. How'd you feel about BRIGSBY BEAR?
1 sentence or less. So my initial thoughts of BRIGSBY BEAR was I thought it was going to be a comedy, so I was quite surprised at how dramatic and heartwarming it was.
Not exactly clear if that's a thumbs up or thumbs down. It's like the expectations were different.
Yes, because it starred Kyle Mooney, who I know is a comedian. It was a very poignant film.
Cool. Well, and let's take that a little bit because we always like to talk about the elements that I think work best. We start positive and then whittle our way down to the things that didn't work as well. And for me, I'm going to start with screenplay. And I don't normally do. It's like one of the last things we usually talk about. But I do think the screenplay is super, super strong for this film. It actually was one of my top 5 original screenplays of 2017. Though not the first project to deal with reassimilation to the world post-captivity, it feels like a vitally original approach. Furthermore, the details of the world building are expansive and impressive. Not just the world in a vacuum that Ted and April created, but by extension, the BRIGSBY world as well. The balance of drama and comedy is seamless to my mind, as Angelo sort of referred to just a second ago. I thought it was extraordinary work in that regard. The pain of the parents, for example, creeps up in unexpectedly and in powerful ways. But at the same time, there are a ton of moments that I found smartly hilarious. And all those moments don't feel like they're from two different movies. So I think the screenplay is very commendable here because of the originality and the tone and the details.
I agree with that the screenplay was original. I may bring up my first, I guess, negative point. Yeah. So, felt like, oh yeah, we should put that in and we should put that in, kind of thing. Does that sound weird?
Did it feel like disjointed? Is that what?
I don't know if it was disjointed. I felt like there was a little, a touch of Hollywood like notes that were put in there by some of the producers, like, oh, you should have that in there and you should have that in there. While it didn't take away from the characters, I think it may have probably hurt the story for me, at least.
Well, I'm going to dig into that a little bit because I'm curious. Did anything, because I didn't feel that necessarily, did anything feel disingenuous? Okay, I'm going to use a buzzword, so let's all drink. I'm asking you if you felt like it was contrived.
One thing that I felt was contrived was when he found the waitress character.
You can see that in the sense that I feel like he found her wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Use Google, and I feel like it should have been something that the Greg Kinnear character helped with.
Yeah.
But I don't mind the concept of him finding her. In fact, given his character, it makes sense that he would look. And also this obsession with rebooting Brigsby, as it were. Anytime we can have Caitlin Sheil in a movie, I'm happy to have that. Were there other moments that you found disingenuous?
The party, I guess, a little bit. You have to show him kind of not fitting in this world. He has to slowly make his way into the world. I'm not saying that it was a bad scene. I just felt like they had to reach for it.
There's a particular element that helped that scene work for me, and I'll get to that. Matty P, what about the screenplay?
It's split for me because there's a lot of the movie that worked for me a lot. I really enjoyed it overall. But I think all the stuff that I had problems with were probably screenplay related. A lot of things were shortcuts that maybe made sense in the moment, but they didn't last. They certainly don't sustain a second viewing or even like a second thought. But they get you through the moment. And some of the characters were really good, fleshed out, and some were really thin, kind of like one note. It was really kind of half and half depending on the scene or the situation. We can get into some, but it was sort of split on the screenplay.
Can you give me one example?
For example, the very beginning of the movie, I really liked the scene where the two original parents sat him down, and it seemed very realistic. They're like, you're wasting your life with the BRIGSBY bear. And it made sense because that's all we knew at the time. In reality, why would they start questioning the one thing they gave him to do and say you're wasting your life with it? It's like, I don't understand after the fact, looking back on it, why the mom would even say those words.
The mom is a fabulous actress, Jane Addams. Anything she's in, she's gold. But I interpreted that as if BRIGSBY Bear got out of control for them. I think they wanted to stop making it. I sort of interpreted that as them trying to steer him towards the math, because a lot of the BRIGSBY Bear was about, in the later years of BRIGSBY Bear, was about the math and, high concept science.
I could buy that. It was a nice dynamic between the parents. I mean, you could tell they were on different sides of that argument. They weren't a unified front. So I appreciated that. And I did look back at it a second time just to see. And what you're saying makes sense. It also wasn't explored. So it's just sort of this thing that it made sense in the moment. You're like, well, wait a minute. That's his entire life, which they created for him. And there's a couple things like the therapist, for example, was sort of oddly not supportive, the Claire Danes character later on. And there's just different things that I'm like, oh, what's that? Go ahead. Yeah.
Put a pin in that one.
Mm-hmm. You can forgive the entire premise for a moment. The movie was about him integrating into a new place. And I really liked him finding friendships and his sister, and that exploration of filmmaking and all that was pretty good.
And that's what I think about, I referred earlier to the fish out of water concept, and it's done all the time, but it's done well. And to Angelo's point, there's some comedy, there's some Saturday Night Live-esque comedy, but then there's also this grounded element, the very realistic nature with which he befriends his own sister even, or these other folks, that really resonated to me.
The biggest contrivance was probably the show itself. How is that dad making that many shows and that many books? And when you look at his room without knowing the bigger picture, it seems like he's a fan who bought a lamp and he bought a book at a bookstore and he collects this stuff over his lifetime. When you realize that the dad and the mom made that lamp.
But also his dad was a super successful toy maker.
This is the full-time job what the bedroom represents. It's just unbelievable that one person would have made that much material on an ongoing daily basis, including peripherals and books and movies and whatnot.
Just because you're lazy with your time, Matty P, doesn't mean everybody is.
It's if you're going to kidnap somebody, that's your crime. You're going to kidnap, you want a kid or whatever, so you kidnap them. And then you create what we see on the screen, which is kind of ridiculous.
I mean, it's extreme, but I do buy it within the language of the film.
Yeah, I can buy it. I liked it. I appreciated it. But at the same time, if you apply any logic to it or look at it to where you're like, wait a minute. But so then the second thing is once you accept the fact that the show exists and then he brings it to the current cast, I didn't buy that it became a public phenomenon. I mean, it's a little silly.
My interpretation of that is that people responded to the camp factor of it. I don't think people were like, oh, this is brilliant cinema that I'm watching. I think people are like, oh, this is dumb and stupid, and it's the kind of thing that would catch on YouTube.
Yeah, but for a group of high schoolers, unrelated to the kid who showed it to them, watching it during lunch break, that's a little bit pushing it. I'm saying this because I really enjoyed the film, but these are the kinds of things screenplay-wise that I'm like, really?
Things that are fantastical work better if you ground them. If it's played straight, that I think is successful in the sense that everyone took it very seriously.
Well, here, let me say one thing about that, because I like this kind of opening. Like, I thought, for 10 minutes, I thought that's what the movie was, and I would have bought it for sure, and I wouldn't have any of these sticking points. The fact they took this bunker and put it in to the actual grounded real world, it put this up for a little more scrutiny. And I think that's the issue I have more about it.
It sounds like it's subjective, and I understand what you're saying cerebrally, but I didn't feel that. I sort of was like in the world it created, and it's funny because I liked the balance. I thought it just hit just the right mark on that front. All right, so I'm going to move on to performances. We've been alluding to them a little bit. My ex-girlfriend that Matt has worked with always used to feel that Kyle Mooney was underrated as a Saturday Night Live cast member. Now, she says a lot of crazy things, but I have to admit, this performance was next level. Of course, he co-wrote the screenplay, so there's no extra layer of interpretation per se, but his execution was very effective. The consistent lost look in his eyes during much of the first half of the film, coupled with a passion for Brigsby that he made very believable. I also found lots of little nuanced details throughout the performance, in his body language, for example, in how much he communicated with grunts and moans under his breath, or without any dialogue at all. I think it was a fully realized performance that always felt like someone who was not exposed to the world as we know it until later in life. I bought that completely. To Angelo's point about the party scene, I think the party scene worked for me in large part into what Kyle Mooney was doing in terms of his integration, his discomfort at first, and then getting a little drunk and high, etc. That mini arc that he has at that party, I thought it was executed well from a performance point of view, and that's why I thought that scene worked for me.
Yeah, I liked him a lot. I agree with everything you said. I had one question because it came up for me a little bit. It's kind of screenplay, kind of acting, where I kind of didn't know if I was always reading it correctly, if he was just inexperienced and therefore acting in certain ways, or kind of less intelligent and then saying certain things. Because sometimes it seemed like clearly what the intention was is he's joining this community after not being in it. And other times he sort of made weird choices or said things that I'm like, even back at home, he would be a little weird and say things that I'm like, oh, he's not fully aware of what's going on. So there's this fine line between he's a fish out of water and doesn't know what to say and doesn't know how to act, versus he's just also not integrated in any particular place.
Well, I mean, that's true in the sense that he's not integrated socially. Because I think he's intelligent. He's obviously extremely intelligent from a book smart point of view. You know what I mean? And a lot of times those people are very socially awkward. A lot of those stupid things are social graces, but also bear in mind that he had no access to anything. If you're a kid that told that skincer is a thing, if you breathe, what do you know nothing else. So what else are you going to do? So I think I didn't have any bumps along those lines. He was so insulated by, obviously to an extreme that, it's hard to say that he should know something, when everything was spoon-fed to him, intentionally. Angelo, where are you on Kyle Mooney in general or anything Matty said?
I'm going to first touch on what Matty said in terms of the character reminding me of somebody who's homeschooled. That didn't strike me too much as extreme where his reactions were like that. And I agree with you, Matty. It's like you don't know if he's not smart or if he just doesn't know. That's how a lot of, I think, homeschooled kids who are now adults, I think that's how they become like that.
So it sounds like you bought it.
Yeah. In terms of Kyle Mooney, he's not my favorite actor on SNL. I was surprised that he's in this film only because I never thought I would see him in anything other than SNL. But I was pleasantly surprised by his acting. And like you said, it's on another level. And he wasn't trying to be Kyle Mooney or any of the characters he was on SNL.
So now I'm going to talk about another performance. Just a little bit, I'm going to talk about Mark Hamill, who's only in a couple scenes, but I actually thought he was outstanding. I actually flirted with the idea at the time of adding him to my supporting actor list of the year, but there just wasn't enough screen time. He committed to the fantasy world that he created, all in order to have and raise a son. He did many awful things in the period leading up to the film, and yet seems at peace that it was worth it in order to have that family life experience. I sensed this whole backstory in spite of just a few scenes. And the specter of Luke Skywalker has hung over the career of this guy, who has grown significantly as an actor since his debut in 1977. I thought Mark Hamill was outstanding, Angelo.
I agree. I mean, Mark Hamill is so underrated because of who everybody knows him as. This was a nice departure for him, I think. And a good move on his part to do this.
Matty P, Mark Hamill.
I think it was great. I agree with everything you said. I would like him for Best Supporting Actor as well, if maybe a little more screen time. Maybe not even.
Yeah, there's some good performances that year. I named Will Poulter in Detroit the best supporting actor of that year. And if you've not seen Detroit, the Catherine Bigelow film, it's pretty phenomenal. And that also made my top 10, although lower down the list, but the performance was higher. So a couple more performances. I don't think we need to discuss it, but I just want to say that Kayla Watkins is a national treasure and just needs to be in more things. She's just phenomenal. But I do want to take some time to talk about Matt Walsh. Matt Walsh is a master improv actor, and as a result gets pigeonholed in comedy. But here I think he shows real range and mastering the tone set by the script and director that I talked about earlier. And it sounds like these guys might not agree, but I think he masters the goofy dad, but also the aforementioned pain of having lost a son. I believe he would try that hard to connect with his son, but I also believe that the pain would emerge, and sometimes in healthy ways, when the family unit he dreamed about that suddenly seemed possible isn't manifesting itself because his son feels too attached to this evil man who raised him. I think from a foreign point of view, it's some really great work from Matt Walsh. So let's turn to our other Matt to ask.
It's good. I'm most familiar with him from Veep. Wouldn't have picked him as one of my favorite actors of the movie, but I don't disagree with what you're saying.
Well, I mean, I wanted to call him out because I think it's a departure for him. We talked about the departure for Mark Hamill, and I think it was a departure for him. And I'm glad to see someone testing and giving Matt Walsh a chance to prove his range because he's clearly got the skills. Angelo?
I've only seen Matt Walsh mainly on Veep too, and he plays a bumbling, goofy,
and he plays it beautifully.
But like you said, this is a nice, good departure for him as well because he does kind of get to dip into his serious side, and again, a father role too. So there's a lot of performances in the movie, but there's only one that bumped for me. I liked almost everybody except one, and it's not to be mean, but I just want to point out the one anomaly for me, and I thought Jorge Lindeborg Jr. as Spence felt a little forced. He always seemed not fully comfortable with the balance of hipness and nerdiness that I feel like the script wanted to convey. Neither felt too believable, and it felt like something of a mishmash in terms of performance. And it's worth calling out because everyone else was so good, and there was just this one little thing that was not like the other that didn't feel like it fit in this movie and wasn't as complete a performance. I didn't mind him some. I kind of understand what you're saying. Is he a geek or is he cool?
And I also wonder too, because Matty was saying he got into the BRIGSBY Bear thing so much. I think performance-wise, he needed to make that work a little better in his overall characterization. I think you think that because it seemed in the beginning that a guy that hip would not necessarily be as into the BRIGSBY Bear stuff. And then all of a sudden he's a camera geek. And so there's a disconnect there. And I don't think it's a script disconnect. I can see someone make that argument, but I feel like that you can draw the line there. I just don't think he figured it out as an actor, Matty.
I didn't have a problem with him in the way you're describing. And well, I guess in the way that he acted, I thought his performance was pretty good. I liked him because he sort of represents, what he was is like a sort of stereotypical character who is the cool guy or whatever, and then makes friends with the nerd guy or whatever. You've seen that in movies before, but he ended up being sort of a more important character. That never changed from the character you might expect in other movies. And then just said that he was one of the secondary main characters. I think it's more of a script thing.
So that's the thing. Oh, I guess I should ask you guys. So I've talked about some performances. There's a lot of other actors. Is there anyone you want to call out? I just called out some standouts, both good and bad. Is there anyone else you want to call out in the large cast that you feel good about?
I'm going to go something bad about, and it goes back to the SNL thing, where I wish he didn't cast Beck Bennett and Andy Samberg. As much as I love Beck Bennett too,
they're best friends. Don't forget, Beck Bennett and Kyle Mooney are best friends.
I didn't know that. It's weird. They had this scene where they were in the same frame, and I was just expecting sort of this little kind of funny banter. I kind of didn't understand Andy Samberg's sort of cameo in there.
I can see that point of view. I think if they just left it to the first scene where it was almost like just a subtle thing, it might have been okay, but he kept coming back. I think
that he was in the show at the end too.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where it went awry for me. So I see that point of view. Matty, anything on Beck Bennett or Andy Samberg?
No.
Do you know who Beck Bennett is?
I don't.
That's really fun, so I thought I'd check. I don't know if I have anything stand out to talk about in terms of direction, which is why it's third. I don't have a lot of complaints, but a lot of things that we talked about are accomplishments. The tone is executed by the director, and we talked about the balance of comedy and drama, which I like. I also thought the pace of the film showed a skill for comic timing, knowing when to be fast and knowing when slowing things down maximized the humor. We talked about the overall strength of the performances and the casting, which also falls on the director. Some things that we haven't talked about is I thought the use of montage was uniquely effective in both plot and character development, for me personally. And also the mise-en-scène. I thought the detailed world of Brigsby in particular made its way off the script onto the screen in a variety of ways. This not only added richness to the film, but highlighted the lengths to which Ted and April went to in order to maintain their world of illusions, but also the lengths to which that illusion infiltrated James's brain and sense of self. So the ubiquitousness of Brigsby in the design and throughout the frames, I think was a really smart choice and done in really smart ways. The last thing is not really a directorial thing, but rather than give it its own section, I'll just say I like the score a lot. Matty P is a part-time composer sometime. It wasn't showy or memorable as a score, but musically nice and also effective without being overwhelming. Not a top 5 score or anything, but commendable work by David Wingo. A very worthwhile element to the film, I think. So that's what I've got from a directorial point of view.
I had no problems with any of the direction. I agree with you where it went from drama to comedy and had a kind of nice little flow to it as well.
Anything on the montage bit, that's a hard thing to pull off nicely, and I think they did do the montages nicely, him and the editors.
The one montage I recall is early in the film.
Like when he's coming up with the feature version of Brigsby.
Yeah.
He's sort of doing that, and I think that's done very well. And you get a sense of how his character's growing during that time, but also this idea of him making movies is really the impetus for the rest of the plot. Matty, direction.
There's a scene I really enjoyed at the very beginning, and I'm curious if you recall any film school terminology that I can't remember, but when he left the compound for the first time in the police car, I really loved how it was this transition from one place to another and him sort of realizing the reality of what's going on. What I was trying to remember was, so when the audience and the character has the same point of view, and they know the same things versus when the audience and the character knows different things, and it's either they know more or they know less. I don't know if there's terms for those.
There is.
What is
it's
it?
A limited perspective versus general perspective.
Okay.
We talked about this when we did the North by Northwest review, because the North by Northwest, if you remember, as a film, switches from a limited perspective where we only know what Cary Grant knows, and then in the middle of the film, they have that meeting with the CIA or whatever they're called in that film, and all of a sudden we know everything.
Well, so this is actually the same, but for different reasons. We start knowing exactly what he knows. We're in the compound, pigeonholed into this environment, and we assume that's the entire universe. But then, as soon as he's in the cop car and gets out of the cop car, as an audience member, we leapfrog his knowledge and his awareness because we know everything about the real world and he knows nothing. So suddenly we know how he's going to survive or not. So it's this really interesting switch of perspective to super limited with blinders on, actually it's the entire world, however you want to think of it. But then he knows as much as we do and vice versa. But then we know infinitely more than he does in the very next scene. And that transition is that cop car. And it's kind of cool.
I think it's a screenplay choice ultimately, but I think it's a really nice choice and worked really well for the structure of the screenplay, I think.
Yeah.
So Matty P, Angelo does not know what's next, but you do. Would you want to call out the next segment?
Could it be themes?
It could be. What's it called?
The T word.
Let's call it the T zone.
T-zone.
From now on. But no, so far we've only called it the T word. And the reason it's called the T word is because the founder of the show, Drunk Davey, always used to hate talking about themes. So whenever anybody else in the show wanted to, we had to dance around it. We called it the T word, and the segment was born. And so now we're going to talk about themes of the film. I alluded to some in my clip from 2017, but tonight I want to start talking about education to some degree, and a couple things as far as education is concerned. First, the concept of heredity versus environment, and this film falls solely on the latter. And then the other concept is, like the song says in Into the Woods, children will listen. In this case, James's captors purposefully manipulate his input to shape his worldview for their own selfish reasons. And it sticks. Imagine learning that everything you knew was a lie, especially when you're told that curiosity is an unhealthy emotion. I experienced this much to a lesser degree when I first moved to New York, having grown up in a sort of conservative town with the accompanying values. It was more of a gradual realization for me than the shock to the system that James received. But I discovered the values that I was taught didn't make sense to me anymore, the political values anyway. And almost any parent would want to instill their values into their children. It only makes logical sense. But I often wonder if it could be less about dictating your ideas to the next generation than giving them the tools to make up their own minds when they are ready. And so I'm going to turn to our only parent on the show, Matty P, and see how he feels about this concept of education as it relates to heredity versus environment and our responsibility to the next generation.
Ideally, I think you would teach your kids how to make a decision and they make their choices, as opposed to telling them which choice to make.
That's what I'm talking.
That's what I believe. Whether I can carry that out on a daily basis or not, I can't quite say, but I do agree with that sentiment.
And I feel like the film sort of calls that to mind to some degree. You know what I mean? In the way that he was brainwashed. He was literally brainwashed. It points out the power of the parents. You know, a lot of the Trump voters out there, and not to make it about Trump, but that's sort of, you know, what everybody says about the alt-right now. It's like they just call them Trump people, better or worse, and maybe that's unfair. But the idea is that I think they too never escaped in order to make their own minds up to some degree. And I don't want to necessarily call them brainwashed, but it's pretty darn close. Or the values that they're instilled with by their parents, you know, because a lot of these values are old school values. I'm not trying to make it political. It's just one of the things that the film made me think about. If you have no access to other ideas, like I believe a lot of the alt-right don't, then, you know, then you're going to believe what you believe and be resistant to other ideas. It's a matter of insulation. And so, yes, that's what I'm talking about in terms of education.
I agree with what you're saying, but in terms of the power of the parent and the spreading of ideas or adoption of ideas, but you also can't discount the power of rejection and rebellion, which happens also almost as much. But maybe absent any other influence or option, then there's no real thing to rebel to.
That's exactly what I said. Like, if I did not escape New Jersey, then I would not have had, you know, access to those other ideas.
I was curious about this line that he says. They said, how were they with you, whatever? And he's like, they're boring. Which really surprised me that he said that. So there is a form of rebellion, even within this sort of wonderland that he appreciates and respects and is excited by, and he attributes that all to his father. His father's still boring.
He didn't have the tools to reject any of the major ideas. Right. The ideas that he's receiving aren't just coming from his parent in his mind. As far as he's concerned, a lot of these ideas are coming from this TV show. We know that they are coming from the same place, but he does not. So they're a little more potentially acceptable to him.
It's a well-orchestrated con, for sure.
Angelo, education, the power of the parent, heredity versus environment, a lot to dig into here.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to talk about the power of the parent, because what I felt, especially with both parents.
Both sets of parents, you mean? Parents.
Yeah, both sets of parents. I mean, both sets of parents. They wanted to protect their child, but the way they did it was totally different.
And yet, like the same result. Captivity in both times.
Yeah, right? Exactly. It's like, as much as you want to protect your child, I don't think they will find a way. Or the mom earlier found out that, oh, you know, we should just let him be, and then sort of help him out in that way. And I think that was the evolution of their parentage. You know, for them as well.
For sure. But also, I mean, like, in terms of turning on him, or I don't know if you call it turning on him, but they went through a lot of pain. 25 years of looking for their son. Like, that's got to be torture. And the amount of times they must have been tested emotionally during that process. And then to have him thrust back into your life again, that's a lot. So I understand.
Yeah, but once he came back to them, they were trying to raise him as if
he never left.
Not realizing, you know, this kid's he's been in isolation for his whole life. And kind of have to figure it out instead of just kind of forcing your way on him.
Yeah, that leads me to my next item on the in the T word here. It's sort of related, and this is the one that I called out the most on in the clip from 2017, and that's related to mental health. Through story and performance, this film touches on that subject that comes up a lot on the T word. Firstly, my general impression is that the therapist depicted in this movie is terrible. And Matty sort of talked about that a little bit. With that said, however, whether it's the performance by Claire Danes or just the script, I found it very real, very much not disingenuous in terms of representing some of the problems with mental health care in not just America, but the world in general. While I very much understand the frustration with the parents and the doctors depicted in the film with James's inability to let go of Brigsby Bear, the character of Brigsby Bear to some degree represented a Nazi-level style of manipulation and, a word I used earlier, brainwashing. And I don't use that term lightly. However, just as staggering is the lack of compassion and understanding from many on the outside world. Taking someone who is captive for 25 years and locking them up again for their own good does not seem like a solution. Like many others, they try to solve James's problems like a math problem, but the level of logic doesn't apply. It's like trying to nail Jell-O to a tree. And I'm going to go straight into my next theme because this leads directly to my final theme. It's kind of an offshoot because ultimately James finds that real healing begins with creation. He's able to express his conflicted emotions in art, and art based in the only language he knows, Brigsby Bear. In a way, the film winds up being an ode to the dreamers that are artists. Those of us that are compelled to tell stories in some way, shape, or form, and often we're not exactly sure why. So often as a kid, my parents were frustrated by all the time I spent writing and inventing stories. They would tell me to take my head out of the clouds. What they failed to realize is that creation is expression, whether it's pain or joy, the frustrations of life, or existential exploration. And through that expressions, maybe that art might be able to speak to someone else's experience or help them to understand yours. The more that can happen, the more that brings us together as a global society. That may seem like overstating it, but I truly believe that. And so in its own way, I think this film speaks to the potential of the creation of art, not only as expression, but also as therapy, especially in issues related to mental health. So guys, I've got this sort of intertwined theme here of mental health care, and also creation and of art as therapy. Matty, anything on those?
I agree that the Claire Danes character was sort of frustratingly ineffective. And it bothered me a little bit in terms of the movie itself. But I think now that I'm hearing you talk about it, I'm looking at it a little differently, because everyone else in the movie was almost overly supportive. It's clearly not a mistake by the movie to have this one character be 100%, 180-degree opposite from the other characters. It's just to show she represents this sort of bigger problem in a very small kind of way, but it's so counter to the rest of the movie that she stands out. And I see now from listening to you talk, I think it was super intentional and started making a point as opposed to just having a thinly written character.
I completely agree with that. It seems to speak to a larger point, like you said, and effective. One. For me, I bought it. Angelo.
No, I agree, and it's almost now that you're talking about it, you kind of think about sort of almost the hubris of psychiatric professionals, where her character was telling him, you have to move on. It's so hard to do that, especially if you have the mind of a child or if you're in that mentality.
To her point, his situation is so unique. She might have been overwhelmed or like overmatched is probably a better word. And a lot of psychiatrists probably would be. But I mean, like, that speaks to a larger issue. And the larger issue to me is this idea that there's one set of rules fits all in terms of mental health care. That's what I took from it. Matty, anything on this idea of this creation, like the idea of art as therapy?
I love that part of the film. I mean, as a filmmaker myself, it was fun to watch that be the thing that he gravitated towards and excelled at. I agree with your assessment, and the art sort of, I mean, you said something about the art will represent and help other people, but I think in this case, the art itself might be relatively silly. I don't know what the movie ended up being, but it didn't seem super deep. But the process he went through, and maybe other people seeing his process of creation, would be the thing that helped them. Maybe not BRIGSBY BEAR, the movie itself.
It helped him move on. He did it in his way, and he told it in his way.
To Matt's point, yes, it is about the process. Like, the process was therapeutic to him. But if you look at the content of his version of the BRIGSBY BEAR, finally defeats the specter of the evil son, which already had the voice of his father to begin with, and in this case, a little bit of the face of his first father. There's some parallels within his journey and BRIGSBY's journey in his version of BRIGSBY anyway. It's therapeutic in that way. So guys, I'm going to close things out. Is everybody good with that? Matty, good? All right, so it's time for closing thoughts, and it's Angelo's first show, so I'm going to let him go with closing thoughts first.
I think what really touched me as for the movie or with the movie is because we're filmmakers and we know how arduous it could be. We know that we need people to help us make our dreams come true, but we also need the understanding of our parents, who at first don't understand why we do this, but once they come around to it, it helps us, move forward. I loved how this movie sort of closed his first chapter, which is almost seems like, oh, we made the film, let's take a breath and then just move on, and then we could move on, and it sort of helps with, I think, our personal lives as well.
Well, I'm glad you had parents that eventually accepted your profession. Not all of us have that, but Matty did, I think, as I recall. But Matty, it sounds like we've got sort of a qualified thumbs up on these films.
Well, I enjoyed talking about it with you as usual, because your point of view makes me see it a little bit differently. And I still have the same kind of pushes against the continuity issues and the script shortcuts. But they never really bothered me in the first place, but hearing you justify them and how much you like it makes me push them aside even further. I thought it was a fun movie. I liked it a lot, and it's a great discussion.
Awesome. So which brings me to the trivia for the next indie. Which, of course, we're going to continue with indies from 2017 throughout this season. And so we're going to go back to our top 10 films of 2017, to a film that not only made my top 10 of the year, but Devin's as well. The director of that film made a film that made Matt Polis's top 10 of 2021. That is your trivia tidbit leading up to the next indie. Next up, however, is our classic movie discussion coming up on Thursday. We're going back to 1986 to dig deeper on one of the biggest box office bombs of all time, Howard the Duck. And so that's coming up in just a few days. All right, in the meantime, kids, say goodbye to the audience.
Goodbye, audience.
Bye.
Thank you for having me.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.